Greetings and welcome to FSMA Presents, the official podcast run by the FSM Alliance. In this podcast, we highlight the underlying challenges, socioeconomic and cultural factors in FSM. It's a place to discuss the previously undiscussed. Today, in celebration of World Toilet Day, we are joined by Chelsea Wald, who recently published her book, Pipe Dreams. We are also joined by Laura Kallen, the Scientific Communications Officer at PATH's Defeat Deadly Diarrhea initiative. We interviewed Chelsea about her book, which talks about all things toilets. So let's get into it. Okay, so today we are joined by Pipe Dreams author Chelsea Wald, as well as Laura Kallen from PATH's Defeat Diarrheal Disease Advocacy Initiative. Welcome, everybody. Please introduce yourselves and tell us who you are. Chelsea, would you like to begin?
Sure. I am Chelsea Wald. I'm a science and environmental reporter based in the Netherlands, but you might be able to tell from my accent that I am American. And I wrote a book called Pipe Dreams, The Urgent Global Quest to Transform the Toilet, about innovation and sanitation around the world.
Amazing. Thank you. Laura, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi. I'm so excited to be here. Thanks for having me. My name is Laura Kallen, and I work in advocacy and communications at PATH. One of the projects that I'm on is our Defeat Diarrheal Disease initiative. So we advocate for all things defeating diarrhea, including water and sanitation. So I was so excited to read your book, Chelsea.
I'm really excited to be here talking to you too.
Amazing. So, Chelsea, we loved reading your book and we're really excited to have you with us today. But before we get into it, could you tell us a bit more about you, your background, and what inspired you to write a book about toilets?
Yeah, so as a journalist, I've been writing about science and the environment since the early 2000s. And I never, had a particular focus on sanitation. But in 2013, I just happened to stumble on two stories. They were actually assignments given to me by editors that had to do with sanitation. So one was about innovations for very low resource contexts. You can think of kind of the Gates Foundation's Reinvent the Toilet Challenge type of technologies. And then the other was just about heat in cities and where we could find new sources of heat, low carbon sources of heat. And apparently one of those places is our sewers. And I happened to write both of these stories in 1 year. And I realized that there was a lot of potential in these systems that we were kind of letting go to waste. And that wasn't really being reported on very thoroughly, or was being reported on kind of haphazardly. And what I wanted to do was to just kind of uncover some of these stories. And then over time, as I reported more and more, I saw the value of bringing all these stories, all these innovations from around the world together in a book, so that they would have a greater power when put together, and it could be seen as a global problem and as a human problem. And so that's how I ended up writing Pipe Dreams.
That's awesome. So yeah, it's always exciting as a diarrheal disease advocate to find kindred spirits in the poop
totally
world. So a main point that you make early on in the book is that the traditional gold standard, in quotes, for sanitation, which is toilets connected to sewers, connected to waste treatment plants, and then usually to a body of water, really no longer makes sense because these systems contribute to increasing pollution. They waste a lot of resources, like you were just mentioning. And then, of course, the challenges of climate change, urbanization, are really putting stress on these systems. And not to mention that half the world still lacks access to this type of sanitation. So what makes this issue so urgent? And how does public health fit into it?
Yeah, well, I think many people have learned. I mean, I was taught that the toilet and the centralized infrastructure that connects to in the cities that I've lived in the US and in Europe, and in some other places around the world, is a kind of modern miracle. And it is in a way, because it has contributed to stopping the spread of many diseases. And, human lifespans are longer in part because of this, essential technology that separates us from our kind of collective feces and the pathogens in them. But I think we need to go beyond that. I think it's time to start thinking a bit more critically about the toilet and the infrastructure. Go beyond the idea of it being a miracle and start looking at it in light of the realities that we're facing today. And we have two urgent problems. One is that much of the world doesn't have access to this modern miracle. Something just under, according to the latest numbers, 50% of the world's population doesn't have access to what's known as safely managed sanitation, which means that their waste isn't making it safely to treatment. They may have toilets, they may not have any toilets. They may have toilets that are connected to centralized sewer systems even, but there's no wastewater treatment plant at the end. So there's a lot of ways in which that system can and does fail. And then another problem is that places that do have it and that have benefited from it are finding that it isn't actually very well suited for the future that we're facing. And one of the reasons, one of the things that's affecting, all kinds of sanitation is, and will affect sanitation more and more, is climate change. Climate change has a lot of aspects, but one of the aspects that we think about a lot with respect to climate change is extreme weather, storms, flooding, lots of water or too little water. And lots of water is a big problem for sanitation systems. If you think about sewers, you can have sewer overflows happening more and more. And also when wastewater treatment plants get flooded, conventional wastewater treatment, when those plants go offline because of big storms, it can take a month to get them back online again. So they aren't very resilient, and they tend to be located close to the water so that they can discharge into rivers and into the sea, for example. And then when you're talking about, say, pit latrines, they can get flooded, which is something that I saw during a typical storm when I was in Cap Haitian in Haiti. I saw pit latrines fill up with water, which meant that the sludge inside of them was escaping into the local environment. So I think the flood water was really probably had a lot of fecal material in it when I was there. And then it also would get into the grounds water and then would flow into the bay as well, which contaminates it with pollutants, and people might want to use that water for bathing and other purposes. And then you have the problem of drought, which is another problem. Most people don't realize that drought really affects sewers. So sewers need water to flow. So if you don't have sufficient water flowing through the system, it can really start to stagnate, and it also affects wastewater treatment. And then drought, becomes a really big problem for people without extensive services, piped water. If they do happen to have flushed toilets, they might not have water to flush those toilets, which renders them unusable, or they might have to choose, between drinking water or flushing their toilets. So there's just a lot of problems that these systems could face in the future, and they do lack in resiliency. So it's no longer a question of just kind of these specific diseases that we want to rid communities of, but it's really time to look at a bigger picture of planetary health and how human health fits into that.
Yeah, that's powerful. Well, and I would add that, diseases are still a part of it too. That is something we talk about all the time, is that the climate crisis is also a health crisis. And there's actually a lot of modeling now that shows that, every time we have droughts or storms or flooding, you see an increase in cases of diarrheal disease, in cases of, diseases like typhoid. I think it goes hand in hand.
When you look at nutrient loading, for example, from sewage into the ocean or into rivers, you get dead zones, you can get toxic algal blooms. So you can get, there's a lot of feedbacks that are very dangerous that we're looking at in terms of human health and planetary health.
It's almost like we're all connected.
Through our poop.
Yeah. And I think like the theme of your book is taking a holistic approach to managing sanitation at large. And one thing you talk about and you refer to is Lutopia. So for those who haven't read your book, how does Lutopia fit into the challenges that you've just listed?
Yeah, so Lutopia was a term I coined. So Lu as in, a term for the toilet in case someone doesn't get it, and topia as in utopia. Mm-hmm. It's a term that I came up with for this book to create a kind of positive imagination of what's possible, of where people are trying to get to with these innovations. I think so much reporting, about the future is very dire, and I had a lot of dire material to convey. And so also putting alongside it a positive vision was important to me to engage people, because I think it can turn people off just to get the bad information. And it was also why I wanted to report on solutions instead of just reporting on the problems. So I took an approach called solutions journalism, which reports on the solutions and uses examples of people trying to solve problems, real grounded solutions, in order to also illuminate the problems that are that need solving. And so Lutopia for me is a world in which everybody has access to a healthy and sustainable toilet. So it is this holistic idea. And in fact, it's a world in which instead of having this one gold standard, we have a lot of different options. We have options for many different contexts, because to my mind, that is something that we're still missing. Most people, when they think of the toilet, think of this one thing and aspire to it.
So you also discuss gender inequity being a major factor with sanitation access. And we've seen in our work how pretty much across the board, if women are disadvantaged, the health of families and entire communities also suffers. And conversely, when we lift women up, everyone seems to improve. Funny how that works. But yeah, I was wondering if you could give a few examples of how gender dynamics affect toilets and sanitation infrastructure, and how we could potentially use the toilet revolution to improve gender equity.
That's brilliant.
So a lack of toilets or poor toilets, does seem to affect women more, and in addition, a lot about the disease aspects of it, but there's also safety aspects. Women face like a higher risk of assault if they have to use a toilet outside of their home or in a place where they might be exposed to assault. I don't want to make any blanket statements, but or they may, if they don't want to use a toilet because they don't feel comfortable there, they may hold in their urine or drink less in order to avoid having to use the toilet as much, and that's not healthy. And there's around the world, there's a growing sort of menstrual equity movement. So this is cross-cutting. So the idea that women have this kind of extra tax and costs because of their period, because menstrual products are expensive and in some places hard to access, keeps women back or exposes them to unsafe situations, because if you have to use some, an unsafe replacement for menstrual products, then that could put health at risk. And what we see also around the world is that the sanitation workforce skews very heavily male. And I think this is something that this is a way, like addressing this might help address the other problems, because, if you can get more women in the sanitation workforce, then you'll maybe see as a result of that sanitation serves women better, because men might not just be able to imagine what women need, or they may not care about women's issues as much. And of course, toilets make a difference in terms of women's workforce participation in general and in their economic health and stability, because if there's not a toilet where you want to go to work, you can't work. And you can even see that, like, I know I order stuff all the time that gets delivered to my house, and delivery drivers around the world struggle with finding a place to go. A man kind of has more options just because of his anatomy, to find, to kind of surreptitiously relieve himself than a woman would. Like, a woman might not be able to take one of those jobs or other kinds of work that would then be available to a man. So those are issues other than, the health issues that people might consider. And, I think one, is that people who want to innovate in sanitation would do well to keep these issues really in the foreground at the beginning of their planning, rather than making it an afterthought. I don't know, Laura, maybe you would be better to kind of illuminate some of the health issues that specifically face women. I mean, I know that with respect to stunting, that it's a multi-generational problem. So stunting is an issue that faces a fifth of children under 5 around the world, as a result of poor sanitation in part, and that it affects the children of mothers who are stunted. I don't know if that's a good terminology. It doesn't sound good.
No, but that's exactly right.
Why don't we explain what stunted growth is for our listeners?
Laura, would you do it?
Yeah. So stunting results from basically chronic malnutrition, and one of the leading causes of that is it's something we call environmental enteropathy, or environmental enteric dysfunction. It has a lot of different names, but where gut pathogens, a lot of times it's E. coli, Shigella, the bacteria seem to really affect this in particular. It damages your gut. It damages the villi within your intestines, so that you're not able to absorb nutrients as well as you would normally. And so a lot of children are exposed to these pathogens when they're really young because of insufficient sanitation. And then they end up not able to get the right nutrition, even if they have access to nutrition. But it's a vicious cycle, because in these settings, a lot of times you also have malnutrition. So it just sort of feeds off of each other. And because you're not able to get enough nutrition, you don't grow properly. So it's literally a stunted height. But then you also have what we call cognitive stunting, or your brain isn't able to develop properly. So it actually has broader impacts for education and career down the line, and the amount of income that someone's able to earn, and just economies of entire countries. So it gets really big. And women, of course, or, anyone who carries a baby is a big part of that cycle. As you were saying, if you're affected by this, your baby might also be affected, and it's just sort of a cycle of disease and poverty. Another part of this is that it impairs your immune system, so you're more vulnerable to other infectious diseases. So these same diarrheal pathogens in the water are going to affect you worse. So this is this is what we're really passionate about, trying to break the cycle and ensuring that women have access to safe sanitation and water, as well as when women are healthier and more empowered, they're better able to, not only develop a baby, but also just take care of children. As a mother, I feel this myself. Sometimes our society isn't always the friendliest towards mothers, and being able to take children to doctor's appointments or health clinics to get vaccinations plays into it as well. So it sort of blossoms into a lot of health issues.
Well said.
Yeah.
I know we touched on some of these points before, but I guess I wanted to get your take on how the toilet revolution can serve and reach communities who need safely managed sanitation the most. And these communities tend to be in low-income countries or regions. I know, we talked about how the top-down approach, it has its challenges before, but are there any cases that you've come across that you found particularly enlightening to this?
Yeah. So top-down approach is problematic. Totally bottom-up approach, is potentially problematic, because sanitation is kind of this weird thing in that it's a combination of personal private responsibility and government public responsibility, right? There's a lot of players, like a dizzying number of players who have to participate in making sanitation happen anywhere. And, they have to come together for these communities that don't have safe sanitation. And so what I saw in Haiti when I visited the container-based sanitation program SOIL was, for example, how that program could not work if they were not embedded into the community. It really could not, because they need to find new customers all the time. The workers need to be safe when they're going around in the streets. And sometimes there's street protests and they need to get through because they don't have underground pipes to pipe this, the sewage through. They have to go around and collect these containers. So they have to be able to move around in the community safely, and and have the trust of people who are paying them for this service. So they're very deeply embedded in the community, and that makes all the difference. And they're there for the long haul, and the community knows that. That said, it's really hard for them to reach everybody, in part because a lot of people can't afford it. And because that, their model is it's like a business, right? So people can subscribe to it or they don't have to. And that's not really the best way for sanitation to work. Everybody in the community has to use it, or else it doesn't really work from a public health perspective. People are getting privacy. They're, getting sort of personally cleaner environments, but in general, I don't think that it's, it's working. So for that to happen, you need to have a lot more, they have to become, the ideal would be for them to become a lot more integrated into the government, almost kind of like a utility or adjacent to a utility, and operated ideally by taxpayer money. This is the dream that they have. And alongside other forms of sanitation that might be in that city. So it's like one of the sanitation options, depending on what's appropriate. So you can see they have some of this stuff in place, but, for a lot of really important reasons, they haven't accomplished everything. They still have a long way to go in terms of accomplishing what they need to do in order to really provide comprehensive sanitation to these communities. And then at the end of the book, one of the things that ended up in my book, kind of the last minute things that I was looking for, for some examples, to try to show people all the different players that have to be involved and how hard it is, was this behavior-centered design intervention that was in urban Zambia, which Ben Tidwell, who's a researcher, described to me. He worked on it when he was a PhD student. And what they wanted to do there was to convince landlords to upgrade the toilets on their properties so that people could have safer sanitation. And they really weren't asking for a lot. They were asking for locks on doors, that kind of thing. Like, we're not talking about a big, innovative program, but these toilets didn't even have locks on doors. And what they found was that that when they listened to the landlords and they listened to the tenants and asked people what they really wanted, they found overlap. So people were willing to pay more for toilets that were safer and more private and cleaner. Yeah. So the tenants were willing to pay, and the landlords wanted to be paid more. So they found a way to explain that, a clever way to explain this to the landlords, who then really started upgrading the toilets in these ways. But I think what's really kind of interesting and important to acknowledge in this is that none of this really has anything to do with safely managed sanitation or the labels that experts put on these toilets. This has to do with what the landlords want and what the tenants want. Yeah. And then you have, the experts who want something else. And it's really, I think, crucial to keep that in mind and to ask, those questions, no matter what kind of innovation you're trying to introduce. See what everybody really is looking for, what they want, and see where the overlaps are, and see then where you can work together. And from what I can tell, that's often overlooked or missing. And it's key to getting all of these players working together.
That's really interesting, actually.
I thought so too. But in the end, this seemed, at least the initial data showed that the landlords were taking action. They were putting locks on the toilets. Yep. They were upgrading the toilets themselves in some cases, and they were instituting programs so that the toilets were getting cleaned more often, and there was less strife among the neighbors. And that's not a small thing for these families.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And perhaps they were eventually getting paid more than the landlords.
A win-win.
Right.
It brings up an interesting point too about just the importance of like landlords, and you made this point that like people's access to home ownership and sort of real estate is a big factor in this too, because a lot of people don't have any agency over their own toilets if they're renting. I know certainly when I was young and living in a city, I had some non-responsive landlords, so I can definitely relate to that. But it's an interesting aspect that I hadn't necessarily thought about.
I also hadn't thought about before I wrote this book, the issue of landlords, and it just kept coming up again and again, everywhere. Like also, as you point out, like even in my own home, like you have to go to your landlord about your toilet, and so many people rent. I rent, and so that's just another player and another set of needs and desires that have to be kind of accommodated as part of this.
So at the end of the book, you outline several ways that anyone can take action, ranging from learning more about your local sanitation system to trying out a different type of toilet to advocating and raising awareness of the problems around sanitation. How do you think these actions will help us reach, as you put it, Lutopia?
Yeah, well, I wanted to give people like a wide variety of actions because I, want to say appeal to people's own passions and interests. I think that people consider that, sort of sanitation problems. If they're lucky enough to probably be listening to this podcast, in fact, they think, the worst sanitation problems are somewhere else. And I hope at this point in the book, they'll realize that, there's problems of access and sustainability, probably much closer to home where they live. And so I want to encourage people to sort of look in their own backyards and engage with the topics there, because I think, that's where people can make the biggest difference. And I want people to kind of try things out. Like I want people to be a little bit experimental in order to sort of move themselves away from this, to sort of get some mental flexibility around the idea of the toilet. So, try something new with your toilet. Maybe you can pee into a jug and use it in your garden. Yeah. Or maybe, maybe you can, try a bidet or try a squatty potty or whatever it is that appeals to you. So just kind of get a little flexibility around this, and also around kind of talking about this issue, bring it up at a dinner party, see what happens, and see if something emerges out of it. So I just kind of want people to be a little bit more playful with it. And then, also want people to think about, as I said, where their passion is, what is their passion around? And what I hope people realize from the book, and I really realized from writing the book, is that since everybody poops, toilets are connected to almost every aspect of human existence. So no matter what you care about, there's really a toilet angle. Toilets are part of that story that's important to you. A lot of people interested in climate change or social justice issues, or any passion that you might have, like that, a political passion, or it could be, something else altogether. You might be artistic or whatever, but whatever it is, there's a toilet angle. So look for that angle. You don't have to care about like diarrheal disease, right? All you have to do is look for the angle and the thing that you care about, and work from there and organize around that, and bring the toilet discussion into these communities that you're already a part of, for the passions that you're already engaging with. And so that's why I gave this big list of action items at the end to stimulate people to, do something.
Yeah, I loved that list. And you're so right. Although I do think everyone should care about diarrheal disease.
Yeah, I think they should too, but you can't, you can't make,
No, totally.
Vaguely, that's true. I think, let's think there. I totally think people should too. Yeah. But unfortunately, you exist because not enough people do. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Well, and I just wanted to end, I actually had written down this quote from your book that I thought was really powerful and touches on some of the stuff you're saying. You wrote, "If sanitation doesn't work for all of us, it works for none of us. That's the pain of it and the beauty. We are all connected to one another and to every organism on the planet through our toilet."
A massive thank you to Chelsea and Laura for joining us on this episode. We talked about a lot of things, and we are interested in what you think. Have you read Pipe Dreams? If not, you can order it now on Amazon. It's widely available. Also, let's show Chelsea and Laura some love by following them on LinkedIn and Twitter, just to keep up with everything that they're doing. All links to their affiliate organizations will be linked in the description below. You should also just keep up with the FSM Alliance in general. So I will link all social media handles in the description. We also have an amazing newsletter that comes out every month, which includes some of our member news, things happening in the sector, some of our public events. So to subscribe to this, just visit www.fsm-alliance.org. You scroll to the bottom of the page, subscribe to that newsletter. You won't regret it. Thank you again for listening to the very first episode of FSMA Presents. I wish you well, and I will see you soon.